Now, sorry to disappoint some of you who came this morning looking for the second instalment of Patterns of Evidence. We're seeing the other part of the video this morning. And the reason we showed the first part, and actually, you know, it's a thing's like 2 hours long, and we got about 45 minutes of it, so we may have to like a third showing. The second part of it we will show when we get finished with Genesis. We wanted to show you the first part because of the archaeological evidence concerning Joseph and his family in Egypt, in the land of Goshen. And it's interesting, the Bible doesn't say it says in the land of Ramses, and the ancient city before Ramses was Avaris. And of course we saw some of the archaeological evidence for that last time in the video. I thought it was fascinating. The whole thing about the little pyramid with the and if you look closely, they show some more of that later on, and the coat of many colors, and I think it's fascinating. And of course, there's only so much we can learn from archaeology. We have to trust what God says, and God's word is true. And but it's interesting to see that some of those things are still remaining. All right, we're looking at Genesis chapter 48. Now, we're almost finished with the book of Genesis. I'm not quite sure about chapter 49. We might break it up into some smaller sections because there's quite a lot in Genesis 49. Genesis 49 talks about the blessings and really the prophecies that Jacob gives upon his sons, upon his 12 sons. And it's interesting how those things are fulfilled, and especially when we look at Judah. But of course, we know through Judah comes the Messiah. But this morning we'll look at Genesis chapter 48, verses 1 to 22. And before he gets to his sons, he basically deals with Joseph and with Joseph's sons. So the lesson this morning is about Jacob and Joseph's sons. And of course, Joseph's sons were Manasseh and Ephraim. And so let's start, just look at the first 7 verses, if you will. And we'll read those, and then we'll get into the lesson this morning. And so in Genesis 48, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And now thy 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh." And notice when Jacob, Manasseh is the oldest one, as you saw there, as we in verse number 1 talks about Manasseh and Ephraim. But when Jacob talks, he puts Ephraim first, okay? And there's a reason for that. We'll see in that in just a moment. And he says, "And now thy 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. And thy issue which thou begettest after them," and we don't know if Joseph had any more sons after Ephraim and Manasseh, but "thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. And as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem." Now, as we begin chapter 48, we find that Jacob is sick and dying. We see that here in the opening verses of this chapter. If you look also at verse 21, it says, "And Israel said, plainly unto Joseph, Behold, I die." And then if you look up at chapter 49 and verse number 29, 49:29, it says, "And he charged them and said unto them," this is when he speaks to his sons, "I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite." And then in verse 33, "And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered unto his people." In fact, this whole story about the death of Jacob, I think, is quite special. And there's some interesting details that we get. One of the things is, he's talking to his son, he's blessing his sons, he's prophesying on his sons, knowing all the time that in a few hours he's going to be in the presence of the Lord. And he wasn't afraid of dying. There was absolutely no fear at all. It's kind of like, get all this sorted out, and then he just lifts his feet up into the bed, lies back down, gives up the ghost, and he's gathered unto his people. And if you look over chapter 47 also, in verse 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years, and the time drew nigh that Israel must die. It's interesting there in verse 28 that when Jacob comes down into Egypt, he lives in Egypt 17 years. And of course, that's how old Joseph was when Joseph went down into Egypt. So really, the first 17 years of Joseph's life, him and his daddy were together. First 17 years. And really, the last 17 years of Jacob's life, Joseph and his daddy were together. It's kind of funny that, isn't it? 17 and 17, like bookends. But now the Bible says, the time drew nigh that Israel must die. Did you know that there's a time that will draw nigh for you, that you must die? Now, we don't know when that is, and of course we're looking for the uppertaker, not the undertaker. We're looking for the Lord to come. But if the Lord does not come in our lifespan, then there will come a time when we will draw near to death. And there is a day, we all have a birthday, and barring the exception of the rapture, all of us will have a death day as well. Thankfully, we don't know when that is. But I ask in your notes, if today was your last day, would your life change in any way? Look at your notes there. We've quoted 2 Kings. You remember Hezekiah? He got sick, and the prophet came, Isaiah came. It says, in those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. Now, the interesting story is when Hezekiah heard that message, he turned himself, as he was lying on the bed, he was sick, he turned himself toward the wall and he prayed and he asked God to give him an extension of life. And you know something? The Lord heard him and gave him another 15 years. But isn't it interesting that God says, set thine house in order? Would there be anything that you would have to do if today was your death day and you were to die tonight at 8 o'clock? How much would your life change? Would there be any calls that you would make? Is it within your power to be reconciled to anyone? Now, it takes two to be reconciled, but is it within your power to be reconciled? Is there someone maybe that you should forgive and would forgive if you knew this was your last day? Is there somebody you would need to call to bless? I mean, that's what's happening here with Jacob. He's basically setting his house in order. He's going to deal with Joseph and his sons, which is something that was very close to Jacob's heart. And then also he's going to deal with the rest of his sons and Joseph as well, actually in chapter 49. So he's setting his house in order because the day was drawing near where he was going to have to die. And I think it's important that each of us, we don't usually like to think about death, but for Christians we probably think more about death than any other people because really we're ready to die. And in many ways we're looking forward to it, and especially the older you get. The sweeter heaven gets to be to you because many of your friends and family have gone on before you, and there's a homesickness for heaven, and also just the days of our pilgrimage. We're strangers on the earth. This is really not our home, and we do, and we should feel homesick for heaven, for home, and really for the Lord, because we walk by faith, but there's going to come a time when we see Him face to face, and there should be a legitimate desire for that to happen. So death is not something that we're afraid of as Christians, but we need to prepare for it. Now, you don't prepare for your salvation, and that's the major preparation that needs to be made for dying is to be reconciled to God, to be saved. Now, you don't put that off to the last minute. And really, we hear when Jacob is preparing himself, it's nothing to do with his own personal salvation. That was taken care of years and years and years ago. He's been ready to die for a long, long time. But what he's tying up loose ends here at the end. He's going to be speaking to his sons, and he's going to be very straight with them. There will be blessings upon them, but some of them will have to face the consequences of their wrongdoing, and he's going to tell them straight before he dies. And so he's preparing for that event. And of course, all of us should have a will. All of us should be prepared as far as your financial assets and stuff to go to your children, and that should be all organized. We just did it, I think, it must have been 8 or 9 years ago, just when we came back to the States, first time we did that. We put a will together. It's not hard to do. but also, more importantly than your will. We used to talk about the last will and testament. And your testament is not just testifying about where your financial assets go, but there should be a spiritual testimony that you leave with your children, and an assurance that certainly your soul and the Lord, that everything's okay, that you've been reconciled to God, you're saved, and heaven is definitely your home. And then just to set in order things. If there's anything that is lacking in those areas, I think we should take care of it, because the thing about it is none of us really actually know if this is our last day or not. It could be, and we need to be ready to go at any time. So the time drew nigh that Israel must die, and he called his son Joseph. So Joseph, we're going to break this up. The first 7 verses here, we're looking at Jacob adopting Joseph's sons, and then verse 8 to verse 22, we see Jacob blessing Joseph's sons. So Joseph hears that Jacob was sick in the first 2 verses, and it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, behold, thy father is sick, and he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So we see here that Joseph didn't live with Jacob. They didn't live in each other's pockets. Some families do that. They're in each other's pockets. They know all about everybody's business. I think there should be space. Every family should have space. There's that individual family unit that you're to have, and good fences make for good neighbours. And I think there should be space. We could say a lot more about that, but anyway. So Joseph had to find out that his daddy was sick, and when he did so, then he was concerned, and so he went to see his daddy, and he was also, and of course Joseph loved his daddy. There was no doubt. That's part of the wonderful part of the story. Certainly Jacob loved Joseph. He was his favourite, coat of many colours. But when Joseph was taken away from his father, that was the thing that really probably hurt Joseph more than anything. And for 22 years he was gone. There was that absence. And absence makes the heart grow fonder. And when Jacob finally came to Goshen, and Joseph came up to meet him, the Bible says he fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept for a long time. Could you imagine that? The emotion of that moment. There's a real bond between these two men. And so obviously Joseph concerned about his daddy, and now he's sick. He's also concerned about the influence that Jacob would have upon his family, upon Manasseh and Ephraim. And so he wanted, what Jacob valued to rub off on his sons. He wanted to have some influence from his father upon his children. Grandparents are very, very important. The influence that grandparents can have on children is not insignificant. It's really, really important, especially spiritually. And it was an amazing thing. When Jennifer was down the last time, and we were with them for about a week, and then they wanted to go down to Pensacola for 2 days. So this was the first time since the boys were born, and the rigmarole of that. First time that she had left them for any length of time, and she left them with us. Now, Carter can be a bit of a handful, at least I thought he was, with Jennifer, but kids will take advantage of the parents, that. And I thought to myself, when these two go, we're going to have a handful with this wee boy. And something, I was absolutely flabbergasted, because when they left, Carter and Weston, there was not one incident where I thought they were being misbehaved. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. And Carter, I'd be sitting there, and he would come over with a toy, and he'd be looking up and want me to play with the toy and everything. He never cried, never screamed, no tantrums or nothing. And I thought, this is really weird, because if his parents were here, he probably would be throwing a fit. But there was something about the grandparent relationship that is special. And I think Joseph, and he wanted, there was a special relationship that Jacob would have with these two boys, and it absolutely is, as we'll see here in a minute, very, very special. So Joseph hears that Jacob is sick in verses 1 and 2. Then Jacob remembers God's promise to him, verse 3 and 4. So when Joseph and the two boys come in, by the way, the two boys here can be anywhere from 19 to 26 years old. Remember, they were born before Jacob got there, and he's been there for 17 years. And, they were born during the time of the 7 years of plenty. And so, and Jacob comes in, 2 years into the year of famine. So they could have been between 19 and 20. So it'd be kind of like our Andrew coming. It's interesting because it says that Joseph brings him out between his knees, and you're thinking they're just little takes, But they're not. They're grown men, 19 to 20. It'd be like our Andrew taking two boys that age and bringing them before Jacob. But in verse 3, and Jacob said unto Joseph. Now, he wasn't going to mess about with any small talk. He goes straight to the point. He's dying. There's no time for messing about here. And you'll see all the way through this chapter is God is right in the middle of all of these conversations. God was right in the middle of Joseph's life. He'd learned that, even when he was in prison, that God was with him. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good. And Jacob also, God was in these two men's lives. And so in verse 3, Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty, that is El Shaddai. That's the sustainer. Elohim is the creator God. El Shaddai is the sustainer God. He is the one who covers you with his wings. He's the one that protects you, feeds you, looks after you. God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz. Of course, Luz is the name of Bethel before it became Bethel. In the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. So Jacob remembers God's promise to him, and we won't take the time to look the verses up, but Genesis 28, Genesis 35, the Lord actually met Jacob twice. The first time when he left his daddy's house, and then later on he was at Bethel, and those promises were confirmed to Jacob over and over. So Jacob now was blessed by El Shaddai and is about to pass that blessing on to Joseph by giving Joseph a double portion. There's no such thing as the tribe of Joseph, okay? It's the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. So instead of Joseph getting a single portion in the land of promise, he gets a double portion. And that's what's going on here. Joseph is being treated here like the firstborn. And actually the blessing that would go on the firstborn is not actually going to Joseph, but actually to Joseph's sons. Because what Jacob is actually doing here, he's going to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim as his own. And that's what we see here. So Jacob adopts Manasseh. He says, and now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Notice he switches them around, puts the youngest first. Which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Now do you see what he's doing there in verse 5? Reuben was his firstborn, Simeon was his secondborn, I suppose. And he's saying that Ephraim and Manasseh, they shall be mine. This is Jacob adopting Joseph's sons and putting Jacob's name upon Joseph's sons instead of upon Joseph. And so he would get a double portion here. Now, this made the two grandsons of Jacob's own sons, makes them his own sons, and this is why the tribes were named after them instead of Joseph. This blessing was actually the blessing of the firstborn, which Jacob bestows upon Joseph through his sons. Now, we asked the question, why did Jacob give the firstborn blessing to Joseph? Was Joseph his firstborn? No, he was his firstborn. Reuben was his firstborn. And there's two things here. There's two reasons I believe that that Jacob gave the blessing of the firstborn to Joseph, and actually to Joseph's sons. First of all, because his firstborn Reuben had disqualified himself from that blessing, just as Jacob's brother Esau. Jacob's brother Esau sold birthright for a bowl of soup, and he basically it was a common thing in his eyes. There's no value for Esau. Esau disqualified himself, and Reuben disqualified himself. Look here, if you would, at Genesis 35 and verse number 22. And this is important. Do you know that there's some things that you can do in your life that will mess you up? And Reuben, like that. In verse 22, verse 21 of chapter 35, Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. And it came to pass, when Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. And that's all it says about that in verse 22. In other words, his firstborn son commits adultery and, in a sense, incest with his stepmother, which is a concubine of Jacob, Bilhah. And Bilhah was the handmaiden to Rachel. Look at chapter 49 and verse 34. It's interesting in verse 22, it says that Israel heard it, and that's all. It doesn't say that Israel went in before Reuben and read him the Riot Act and brought the whole thing out and judged Reuben or punished Reuben in some ways. He just heard it and he didn't do a thing about it, didn't say anything about it, is silent about it. And many years now go by, but you know something? Jacob never forgot about it. And when we get the next chapter, chapter 49, and he is speaking about his sons and prophesying upon them and blessing them and so on. But look at chapter 49 and verse 3. Reuben, this is obviously begins with his firstborn. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed. Then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. All those years later, and Reuben's going to hear this now in the presence of all of his brethren. You can imagine that was quite an embarrassing moment. And when others are getting the blot upon Reuben, look over at Proverbs chapter 6 for just a moment. This is why the Bible puts such emphasis on the seriousness of sexual sin, because it brings a reproach upon you that the Bible says shall not be wiped away. I thank God for the cleansing power of Christ, and that it can be put under the blood of Christ. We're not going to be judged for it in that fashion, but under the sun in this life, okay, it's a real problem, and we say these things to warn each other, to be really afraid of this type of thing. In Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 27, the Bible says, "Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned?" In other words, you can't mess with this. This is going to bite you. You cannot make a pet out of this to hurt you. If you take fire in your bosom, you are going to get burned. Verse 28, "Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth into his neighbour's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent. Men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry." You know, it's wrong when somebody steals, but if somebody's hungry and they need food and have no money to buy it, at least you can understand it. There's not the same kind of reproach as you have with this. Verse 31, "But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whosoever committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonour shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou give us many gifts." Verse 34, verse 35, speaking about the husband of this woman that had been taken in adultery. In other words, the husband who had been wronged, the adulterer, basically the rage cannot be pacified. You can give him many gifts, but every time he sees you, that's all he thinks about. It's a reproach that can never be blotted out. And then I want you to go to 1 Chronicles chapter 5. 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Now we're talking about why Reuben did not receive the blessing of the firstborn, is because he disqualified himself with this sin. And the Bible makes that clear here in 1 Chronicles 5, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Now the sons of Reuben of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, and the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler," that would be Jesus, "but the birthright was Joseph's." Okay? So, and we saw this when we saw Jacob coming down into Egypt. There's two of his sons came to the fore that it mentioned, and one was Judah. He became the leader. He became the spokesman, although he's number 4. He's the 4th son. You had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and then Judah. But he became the spokesman and the leader of all of the sons. And of course, from that time on, he has always been that all of the kings have came out of Judah. David is the son of, of the tribe of Judah. And of course, Jesus is the son of David, and he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So the king would come out, and we'll see this next time in chapter 49. The king would come from Judah. But the other person, of course, is Joseph. So Judah and Joseph are the ones that come to the fore. And both of those men picture for us the coming of Christ. Obviously, he's from the lineage of Judah. But also Joseph is a type of Christ, being rejected of his brethren, but then becoming their deliverer. So Joseph is a type of the Lord. So, in the first place, the reason Jacob gives the firstborn blessing to Joseph is because Reuben had disqualified himself. But here's another thought. In Jacob's own mind, do you think that Jacob went to Ur the Chaldees, or to Haran, to get a bride, to get 2 brides, to get 4 brides, to get 2 brides and 2 concubines? You think that was in his mind when he left his daddy's house? No way. Listen, when he was at the well and he saw, that's the girl for me, and he was head over heels, love at first sight, you know. And so on that wedding night, he thinks this is Rachel, and that's the only girl for him. He was not going to be married to more than one woman in his own mind. But what happened? Laban tricked him, and of course he wakes up in the next morning and there's Rachel's sister Leah in the tent with him, and he's saying, "What in the world? Could you imagine the shock? Oh, it just must have been horrendous." And of course he couldn't then just put her away, so he had Leah, and then of course he got Rachel as well, and he had to work for another 7 years for her. He worked 7 years before the wedding, then 7 years. But he ended up with 2 wives and then the 2 handmaids, and so he ended up with 4. But that wasn't his plan. Now, if Laban hadn't interfered, he would have had 1 wife. Who would she be? Been Rachel. And who then would have been his firstborn? The firstborn of Rachel was Joseph. She only had 2, Joseph and Benjamin. And so I think that's in his thinking as well, that Joseph really was the firstborn of his heart, and that's why he received. And of course, Joseph had proved himself, and he, in a sense, he certainly had deserved, because he became their deliverer and their savior because of the famine and so on. So Jacob adopts Joseph's sons. Now, if you look down at your little map there, notice how much, if you put Manasseh and Ephraim as the tribe of Joseph, look how much of the land of Israel is divided between Judah and Joseph, those 2 main characters. And so you have Judah down in the south, then you have Ephraim, and look at Manasseh. Manasseh's West Manasseh and East Manasseh. Manasseh's he's got quite a chunk of land there, doesn't he? And of course Ephraim, and actually later on during the divided kingdom, there was the kingdom of Judah and then the kingdom of Israel. And one of the names of the kingdom of Israel was Ephraim. So it was Ephraim and Judah. Israel and Judah, north and south. But you can see how much land they both got because of that. All right, let's look then at verse 8 to verse 22. First of all, Jacob adopts Joseph's sons. Then Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. In verse number 8, and Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, "Who are these?" Now you understand in verse 10 it says that his eyes were dim. Now I'm only 54 years old. But if I take Michael, and I didn't have glasses in those days, my eyes are dim. These are all fuzzy. Now I can tell there's a person there and there's a person there, and I know who you are, all right? But if strangers come in, or maybe people I'm not too familiar with, I would have to strain pictures. Okay. Anyway, you get the picture. He's 147 years old, and he doesn't have glasses. No, it's not that he was blind, but he just couldn't see as well as he could have if he had glasses, probably. So he says, "Who are these?" And he probably knew anyway. But and Joseph said unto his father, "They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place." Now here's what I want you to see as we start this: the worship of God in this blessing. I want you to notice how God is almost in every sentence. God is in the minds and hearts of both of these men, Joseph and his daddy Jacob. And so he says, "They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place." Who gave Manasseh and Ephraim to Joseph? God did. In fact, if you look back, they have the, let's see, I might not have written it down. Go back to, let's see, look at Genesis 41. I don't think I put this in your notes, but look at Genesis 41. And these were born to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar. Probably he got married when he was 30 years old to Asenath, the daughter of the priest of On, at the beginning of the 7 years of plenty. So if you put 7 and 2 is 9 and 17, that's 26. Okay, so the maximum 26 years old. But they were born before they met Jacob, obviously. So and that would have been 19 years. Okay. Look here at verse 51. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For God, said he, notice he says, for God, said he, hath made me to forget all my toil and all my father's house. The name Manasseh means forgetting. This is my boy, forgetting. This is my other boy, fruitful. F and F. Forgetting and fruitful. Manasseh is forgetting. Ephraim, verse 52, and the name of the second called he Ephraim for God. So in verse 51, God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. So he named Manasseh forgetting, because again, I guess it had been in his mind. Obviously his history is just an incredible history. But God had taken the sting out of those memories. And he could now sleep at night, and there was no problem there. And that's why he was so calm, because it was all fresh to them. He says, look, God has helped me to deal with this a long time ago. I forgot all about this. Don't worry about it. It's under those water under the bridge. And in verse 52, Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And so both of those were blessings, but he took them as from the Lord. Go on. See? So in verse 9, they are my sons whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. So now we have the blessing upon these two boys. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. Now, that's interesting. And I guess that's what grandfathers are supposed to do, right? Come here. I mean, we see our grandkids on FaceTime, but if I could reach through the screen, they'll be getting hugs and kisses, right? Because that's what grandparents do. But think about this. And by the way, grandparents should get on like that. There should be a relationship you have with your grandchildren that is compassionate and something, a special relationship to have with them. But those boys were the blessings of God. What are you to do with the blessings of God? Do you reject the blessings of God? Do you mistreat? Do you neglect the blessings of God? See, Jacob had the right response to the blessings of God. He received that blessing. He appreciated that blessing. He loved. He reciprocated that love in that blessing. It's very, very important that we do not curse that which God has blessed. And the blessings of God, that we don't neglect those blessings, that we appreciate those blessings. You've got a lot of blessings in your life. Don't neglect them. Amen. And Jacob didn't neglect them because he was grateful for the blessings. He says, come here. And by the way, they weren't little boys, were they? They were at least 19 years old. And he embraced them and he kissed them. And they were probably bigger than he was. Can you imagine our Andrew coming in, and Papa, hugging Andrew and kissing on him and embraced them. Verse 11, and Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. Now so Joseph started with God, and when Jacob started speaking, what did he talk about? God. You see, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God. God, I never dreamt, I thought you were dead. And here God has given me this great favor and blessing, that not only would I see your face, but the faces of your two sons, of your seed. And so he was thankful and grateful for the blessings of God. Joseph's talking about the blessings of the children. Jacob's talking about the blessings of being able to see Joseph and his boys. Verse 12, and Joseph brought them out, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. What was Joseph's response then to the blessings? Joseph talked about the blessings of God upon him. What was Jacob's response? To receive and to welcome and to be grateful for that blessing. Jacob talks about the blessings of God. What was Joseph's response? To worship. He gets on his knees. And notice now, he's the second in command. And here's this old man, his daddy. And he's a very important guy. Joseph, he's like right up at the top. And he gets down before his daddy. And he bows before him. And he brings the boys before his daddy. And the interesting thing about this is, and the more I study the Bible, the more fascinating it is in the detail. It's fantastic, because you'll know the story if you've read this, that old Jacob, when he blesses them, because here he has Ephraim, I think on his right, Manasseh on his right, he's the firstborn. he would guide him, but he would be on Joseph's left hand because that would be Jacob's right hand. So the right hand must go on the firstborn, on Manasseh. So Manasseh's over here, Ephraim's over here, and he brings him forward, and he's bowing before his daddy. And he's not looking, because Joseph, until after his daddy said all this stuff, Joseph doesn't spot it till you get down to verse 17. When Joseph saw that his father's laid his right hand upon Ephraim, said he was displeasing. So old Joseph's got his head down, as his daddy is, because here's his daddy. His daddy's gone over here and he's done this. He crossed his arms. But Joseph didn't spot it. Why did he not spot it? Because he wasn't looking. He had his head bowed. And so Jacob is unseen to Joseph. He had done this, and he's pronouncing the blessing upon Ephraim, which again speaks about this humility that Joseph had as he brings his sons before his father. And verse 13. So verse 12 says, he bowed them both, Ephraim in his right hand and toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the youngest, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly. In other words, he knew what he was doing, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God before, now this is wonderful, verse 15, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk. Now watch this next, I've got it underlined. The God which fed me all my life long unto this day. He's recounting and remembering the blessings of God upon him, and also Abraham and his father Isaac, and also upon Jacob, the God that fed me all my life long. Now, can you imagine this? This is a really important lesson for us, because there's a lot of times in our lives where we're fretting about, Jesus talked about it, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, what you shall put on. And you're thinking to yourself, what happens if this bill comes, or what happens if, you go into the hospital for a week? Now, anyway, we have this fear of loss, and will there be enough money at the end of the month, this type of thing. And all the way through Jacob's life, and you remember it started when he left his daddy's house at 77 years old, and he met God at Bethel, and he made that promise to God, Lord, if you will be my God, not just my daddy's God, but if you'll be my God and you'll be with me so that I come back to my father's house, that you will provide for me, that you will protect me, that if you will be my God, then all that thou givest to me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. And so that was an act of worship, that he recognized that God was really one looking after him. And when that happened, then he gave the tenth back. That was tithing. Abraham did the same thing, but Jacob did it as well. And the thing is, there was this special relationship, because look what happened when he went to Laban. And he says, when I passed over this brook, the only thing I had in my hand was my stick. And he was there for 20 years. And when he came back, he had 2 wives and 2 concubines and all these kids running around his feet. And all the herds, where did he get the herds? Well, it was through Laban, and he got those really the last 6 years that he was there with them. He served 14 years for his wives and 6 years for the cattle. But who prospered him? And you remember how that happened, the ring straight cattle and all that. Everything that Jacob touched, it was blessed of God, and he got to receive the benefit from that. It was God who fed him. And so here they are in the land of Canaan, and there's a great famine that comes, and it's all the world. Everybody's going to be starving. And God, unbeknown to Jacob, sends one of his sons, his favourite son, ahead of them to be their deliverer, to prepare so that there's 7 years of plenty, and he hoards it up like the sand of the sea. And so old Jacob later on will come down 2 years after they start running out of food. He comes down, and God has provided for Jacob in miraculous ways. And so it's a great thing that we're told, and Jacob recognizes, God has fed me all the days of my life. Let me ask you, who's going to feed you all your days? You say, well, we've got to be wise, and we've got to invest, and we've got to do this and that and other. I think we should be wise, and I think we should gather up during the time of summer, and we should save, and we should prepare for retirement and all the rest of it. I'm going to tell you something. Money's got wings. It'll fly. It'll take off. Go on here today, go on tomorrow. Well, what is that going to put you in a panic? God doesn't want you to be panicking. That's why Jesus said, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, what you shall put on. He says, the sparrows fall to the ground. I don't do it without your Father. You're of much more value than they. Your Heavenly Father knoweth what you have need of before you ask Him. And Jacob is just a wonderful testimony that God fed him all the days of his life. I remember reading that, having some anxiety in my own heart, and God saying, like, would you stop worrying? Anyway, I love it. Verse 15, you'll underline it. The God which fed me all the day, all my life long, unto this day. The angel which redeemed me from all evil. They're speaking about God's protection. Bless the lads, and let my name be named on them. See that? So Ephraim and Manasseh are adopted. They're literally, legally the sons of Jacob. Be named on them, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw, so now old Joseph sort of lifts his head, and he sees his daddy's hands crossed upon his boys. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. So old Joseph was quite annoyed at this. It displeased him. I think maybe he just thought his daddy got it wrong somehow. And he just wanted to correct the problem, because it's a really important problem. It needs to be done right. But also you see here that Joseph, all the time these two boys are growing up, Manasseh's the firstborn, Manasseh will do this, Manasseh will get that. And Joseph had a preconceived idea of who was going to be blessed and who was going to be the leader in that. We have preconceived ideas about life and what's right and how God's going to do things. And sometimes God just does that. And it displeases us, and we're thinking, no, that's not right. Not so, Lord, as Peter said to the Lord. Well, if He's master, if He's not so, whatever He wants, that's what we agree with. We may not understand it at first. And so verse 19, and his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, speaking of Manasseh, and he also shall be great, but truly his younger brother Ephraim shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of the nations. And he blessed them that shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, by the way, isn't it interesting? Like a pattern. Here, Ephraim the second is chosen ahead of Manasseh. Here, Jacob himself, although there were twins, he was the second born. Esau was the firstborn. And God chooses Jacob over Esau. And here in this story, Joseph is chosen over Reuben. And of course, Ephraim is chosen over Manasseh. So many times, and that's what we see here. It's almost like a pattern. The last thing here in verse 20-22 is Jacob encourages Joseph. So obviously, Joseph's got his feathers ruffled a little bit. He's a little emotionally upset here. It says he was displeased. But in verse 20, and he blessed them that day, saying, and thee shall Israel bless. Verse 21, and Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die, but God shall be with you. You see, here's Israel's dying, Jacob's dying, and he's not worried about it. He says, behold, I die, but look, God is going to be with you. And he's giving comforting words to Joseph. God shall be with you and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. That's a prophecy. He says, you're going to come out. Of course, we know that as the Exodus. And when they went out in the Exodus, they took the bones of Joseph with them. Moses dug up, actually maybe it was in that tomb that we looked at in the patterns of evidence. Maybe it's, they embalmed their bodies, as the Egyptians do. And so they took Joseph's body, who had been in the ground for almost 400 years, and Moses took the body of Joseph with him and buried them in the land of promise when they went out in the Exodus. And verse 22, moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the land of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. And so Joseph gets a double blessing, and really gets the blessing of the firstborn, because that Jacob had with Joseph, and because of Joseph's integrity and how God certainly used him to be their deliverer. Well, let's pray together. Thank you, Lord, for your word. We're grateful for this wonderful book of Genesis. Thank you for the wonderful story of Joseph. And Lord, may we learn much from it. Help us, Lord, to be interested in reading the Bible and studying the Bible and thinking about the Bible and gleaning from it truths that will help us, Lord, to be encouraged, to be assured, to have peace and assurance, and that, Lord, that we may love you for all that you are to us and all that you've done for us. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.